Hey, hi everybody. Hopefully, there we go. So welcome and thanks once again for joining in the winter ponds. You're going to see, maybe you get bored to death with seeing pictures of ponds with ice on them, but that's the theme of the day. I do kind of throw in a few ducks here and there and a few other images just to rest the eyes, but this is basically a presentation that I dreamed up for the fun of it. So I did have a little fun. So here we go, winter ponds. And I've basically broken the presentation down into types of ponds. So the first set that we're going to be looking at are what we call meltwater channel ponds. In other words, they're ponds that were formed like everything by the glaciers, but they were formed by water melting off of the glacier and carving out a channel that then gets blocked up, and then water can collect in the depression that's left behind. And we have several of these, and they're mostly along the southern end of Block Island. So they include Fresh Pond, Seneca Swamp, sometimes called Peckham Pond, that's connected through a water courseway, Sands Pond, and Johnny's Tuckle. And so my theme is I have a number of these maps that will show ponds of certain types, and then they'll be followed by photos of the particular ponds that are in blue. Now, some of these are hard to see. This is also, and most of the, I should say, the meltwater channel ponds tend to be elongated in shape, as opposed to a round circular pond. So in addition to the big three of Fresh, Sands, and Johnny's Tug Haul, there's this little one that's very long that I call Brightert's Pond. And right down this road from it is a circular pond called Painted Rock Pond, or I'll get to that in a little bit, what it's actually called. And although it's circular, it's probably both an extension of what was a meltwater channel that went this way, but it also might be a kettle hole pond. So more on that later. So off we go. This first is a familiar Fresh Pond, and this is at the northern end at the Fresh Pond marker, looking southerly, and you definitely get a sense of its elongated form. Fresh Pond is, of course, one of the largest. Fresh Pond and Salcombe Pond are the two largest ponds on the island. So here we are at the south with Fresh Pond, and a slightly different view. Now, as I said, we're at the northern edge, and then we're going to move down to the southern edge. So we're at the other end of the pond, and now we're looking at the southern edge, looking back north. And it's really been quite beautiful out here the last week with the snow and ice and the colors of a Block Island winter. Most of the ponds that you'll be seeing, you can see from public areas, but when you can't see a particular view from a public area, I'm going to let you know. So this view is seen from private property, so you should only go and see this view with permission. But I am on a road that goes down to the southern part of Fresh Pond. Now, if I were to turn around, this view on the left is what I would see. And that is, so I was at the southern end of Fresh Pond. Now, this view on the left is the northern end of Seneca Swamp. And again, this is a view that you don't often see because it would have to be taken by private property. But Seneca Swamp is a beautiful area, and it's you'll see that many of our ponds that have called swamps are actually a pond with associated swampland. So Seneca Swamp has quite a bit of open water, as best seen from this particular view. And if you go over to the right, here's the view from Lakeside Drive, a little pull off right before Mitchell Lane. And this is, you can see the swampiness and then the open water around it. I will say that having ice on most of the ponds for these photos has made it really easy to see the shape and the pond. It sort of demarks the pond in a way that you might not notice if it wasn't icy out there. So another view, this is a panoramic photo, so it's a little distorted, but not too bad. And so you get the whole width. So I was standing about over here when I took the first view at pond level, looking this way. Now I'm up on Lakeside Drive, looking down on the pond. One of the problems with taking pictures of ponds is that you often can't get high enough up to be able to see it well. So this is a nice view. And then of course, this would be Mitchell Lane that would go down on the other side of Seneca Swamp. So as we proceed down the road, down Lakeside Drive, this is what I call Breidert's Pond. It's also, I pointed out, an elongated pond that runs along the length of, runs, its length dimension runs along Lakeside Drive. Beautiful pond, great pond for ducks and whatnot. Black Island has this tradition of naming places. People know places by the name of the property owner that owned it when they first learned it. So the people who owned or were across the street from this pond were the Breiderts, Frederick and Catherine Breidert, and they kept ducks, and they had a duck crossing sign up there for years and years and years. And although there are no longer ducks at this pond, domestic ducks, I still, many of us will know it by the duck crossing pond because of the sign. But this is an interesting pond, as is the case with many, because it's very close to the road, and it is almost constantly full and overflowing its banks. Now here was pretty much the same view looking down the length of it. But then if you come down across from what is, let's see, it was Breidert's, and now of course the landscaper's name has escaped me, but right across the street is the edge of Breidert's Pond. And it's right at street level. I'm standing on the street, and there's a little concrete dock here that's really more like place to stand so you can dip into it, a fishing net or something. But the water is flowing and is often flowing. Here we are just shifted over a little bit, still looking. The pond is, there's a stone wall here. The pond is over the stone wall, and it's actually draining out this edge rather than coming out onto the road, which in spring it often does come right out onto the road. But here it's got a little like sluiceway that takes it down this ditch along the side of the road. And here it is looking from the other direction. So I was looking up here. You can see how close the edge of the pond is to Lakeside Drive. Water is flowing down here and then eventually goes off the road into the brush, into a lower land. But what's amazing is if you look right here, this is the height of the pond right behind the stone wall. And they're trying to, this stone wall and bank is trying to contain the pond, but in fact, water today is running through the stone wall down into this ditch, and that's what you see right here, as well as water running out of this pond. So Black Island has a lot of water which is temporarily held in the pond, and then the pond overflows and the water proceeds on. And we have many more sort of ditches and riverlets and sluiceways and sort of water courses that connect ponds over long distances, many more than you would know because of the vegetation on Black Island. But this is one you can, to really see how water is moving through the ponds and along the landscape and into, in this case, it just goes off into the brush, and because of the brush, you can't really see where it goes from there. So that's Breidert's Pond. If you go down the road a little bit more towards Painted Rock, many of you familiar with this. This is Painted Rock Corner. This actually is a little tiny sanctuary, nature sanctuary. It's known as the Murray Nature Sanctuary. It was a gift to the Block Island Conservancy, so this land is owned by the Conservancy. If you walk this area, you'll know there's a little stone bench up there for sitting and gazing at the pond. Good place. This pond is one of the many that will get very dry in summer, has a lot of lily pads in it. But right now it's beautifully iced over. And it's connected to a marshland beyond this sort of high point of trees, but there's behind that is a very marshy area that's actually very interesting. It has some wonderful plants, things that are not too common on Block Island, like cotton grass and a couple of small orchids and other what we would call wetland obligate plants. So it's really interesting botanical area. But there's Painted Rock Corner, or the Murray Nature Sanctuary Pond, or Painted Rock Pond, I think a lot of people call it. There are many ponds you'll see. I don't necessarily know the names of them. And although it's not for lack of asking. So now we're moving on to one of the other meltwater channel ponds. This is Sands Pond, as seen from the western edge of Payne Road. So this is really the best place to see, a public place to see Sands Pond. If you look back across the pond, sort of up its long elongated sort of axis, you'll see this is the water tower. This is the water company. Block Island's water company no longer gets water from Sands Pond. It has a series of wells, but it wasn't that long ago that all of the town water system, people who had public water, were getting water from Sands Pond. And here's another view of it. Quite beautiful. And this is a great little, because you can walk along Payne Road right around this edge of it. And you often see ducks and great blue herons and egrets and all kinds of things in there. So in the bird time of year, it can be a nice place, a nice walk at any time of year, but a nice place for birds in the spring. And just another look of it a little bit more close. And again, up here is where you'll see the water tower. Moving on to Johnny's Tug Haul, another meltwater channel pond. If you want to know a lot more about this, I did a presentation on this about a year ago, so I'm sure it's in our archive. But this is a fascinating pond. You can't really tell, but there's like an island of material in here. And it's got sort of lobes of it. And it was at one time used for collecting ice in the wintertime, and it had an ice house over here on the left. And there's a new acquisition by the Black Island Land Trust, where if you go along Pilot Hill Road, which is right here, right behind this brush, you can go up on this little knob, and there's a big tree, and you can look at the pond this way and look back at Milliken Farm. Anyway, a lot more on that on the other presentation, but it's a beautiful pond with a rich history, and a useful pond in its day for hauling ice and storing ice for the winter. Another view of it, you can sort of see that this is that little sort of island of land that's surrounded by these lobes of water looking to the south. And then if you look across, it's not very good. This is all just a tease for the other presentation. This building back here is one of the World War II lookout towers. But in this view, it's pretty obscured by the brush, but a nod to history to keep it in there. And it's hard to see, but there's quite a few ducks in there, and they were ringneck ducks, and such a beautiful winter duck. These are one of the first winter ducks that could show up in the spring, in the fall, late fall, and they'll be among the first to leave in probably another month or so. It'll be hard to find a ringneck duck on Block Island, but a beautiful duck. Okay, so now we're going to talk about ponds that are either gone or going over the edge of the island, that is. And just to get your bearings, this is Clay Head. This is the pond that's gone. Again, these are all overlaid on top of the 1897, 96 Stonewall map. So there are things that aren't quite the same. Their ponds are more visible. a lot of times they've sort of marshed in a little bit. Roads aren't always where you think they are. They're close, but not the same. Anyway, this is the upper edge of the Clayhead Trail. You can get on this by walking, but you can't get on this. Now, this designates a road, an old farm road. This road is gone, as is all of this land. And back in I believe it was in the late 80s, early 90s, erosion was such that it breached this pond right here, and the water flew out. And there's a giant eroded sort of gully down to the ocean at this point. So on some of the Lapham's maps, who actually own the property under Clayhead, they referred to this as Hourglass Pond. I don't know if that's an old name or their name, but it has a connection right here. You can see the stream connection. So it was like an hourglass with two sort of bulbs of water connected by a very thin stream. Only this part of the hourglass is now gone. So that's one that's just to help get your bearings about where the upcoming photos are. And then the next one after that, we're going to talk about the Springhouse Pond, which is over here on the edge behind or south of the inner basin of the old harbor. And while we're on this, just notice how much land there is between the pond and the ocean in around 1897. So 120 years ago, 30 years ago. And again, another two-lobe pond, a pond connected by a very narrow connection, and then another pond. All right, moving on. So here we are, the eastern end of, quote, Hourglass Pond on Clayhead. This is how it looks today. This is very shallow. It's just a shallow pool of water at this time of year. In the summer, it's almost completely dry because it keeps when the water gets to a certain level, it just flows over the edge here. And here's a look of it. So this is looking from the trail. You can walk by this on the Clayhead Trail. You walk by here. Now we're behind it. Can't walk to the east of it anymore. Looking east. And then once you get up here, you can look back, and this is the view you'll see. And you'll see, you get a sense of how shallow this little pool of water actually is, because this is exposed right now. This is just marshy vegetation, which you can see right here. And when you're up at that point, so we were looking this way towards the ocean, came around the path comes up like this. The path used to go this way. They had to recreate the path, remove the path, because this pond eroded off. And over here, you can see, as best I could show without getting into a dangerous situation, the fact that the erosion comes way back here. And then I'm sort of teetering on the little edge, trying to show how close this edge of the pond is. And it doesn't take very much rain to make the pond build up and then flow more over the edge. It's a constantly eroding edge. So that's a pond that's mostly gone. I don't have it in the presentation, but if you went to Dickens Farm and you walked out there, you'd find a pond that is completely gone. So I guess you wouldn't find it, but that's for, you can read it, you can hear about that in the Dickens Farm presentation of a while ago. And now we'll move to the Springhouse Pond. And probably many of you are familiar with this wonderful view of the Springhouse Hotel up here, and then the Springhouse Pond below it. Beautiful pond. We're at the southern end. In a few moments, I'll take you to the northern end, the northern lobe of this pond. But if you look closely, what you start to notice is this has an edge that's getting very close to the edge of the island. And this is, again, looking from the southern end, but this is the weak spot right here. You can notice it by this, like 3 or 4 bayberries just sticking up there. And then I look in a little closer, and it may be a little deceiving. It may look a little closer than it is, but I'm sure this break is, I didn't go to examine, nor should I, nor should anyone. It's, I'm sure, less than 3 feet. It's probably closer to 2 feet at this point. So that's getting very close. And there it is, even closer look from this vantage point. And then if you go down to the northern end lobe of the pond, okay, so now I'm behind the 1661 inn. And over here is where the old Ocean View Hotel would have been. There's the remnants of a building called the Tuna Club. This is the northern lobe. And if you connect it back down here to the southern lobe and then on to Old Harbor Point right here. Like beautiful, beautiful views. And then here's that weak spot looking from a slightly different angle. And you can see even in these, it looks even more precarious. So this pond, it's highly likely that many of us will see the end of this pond or the radical changing of this pond. Probably it'll be like the one at Clay Head, where most of the water goes, then a sort of a marshy area settles down in the southern lobe, and the northern lobe will continue to feed it. And there it is in its widest version, trying to get a sense of this very elongated pond with the two parts, northern end, the southern, and the very narrow spot. Although this is actually, there's a little opening there. It's fairly wide. You sometimes see kayakers or something going in there. However, I don't recommend kayaking in this pond because you never know when it's going to go. Okay, so those are ponds that are gone. I mentioned earlier that there's lots of waterways connecting ponds that we probably aren't necessarily aware of, but there's at least 3. 2 of them I'll identify here. There's more than 3. There's 3 I'm going to talk about. This is this pond here is Mill Pond. This is the little pond next to Town Hall. It is fed by this, which at the time of this map was a swamp. It was dammed up to become a pond. So it was Milltail Swamp, and now it is Milltail Swamp Pond. But it connects through the dam, little drainage area into Mill Pond, which flows underneath a culvert, down a ditch crosses over Ocean Avenue, just north of just west of the Black Line Grocery. And then that flows into the back of Harbor Pond. So this waterway is sending water 24/7 into the ocean. And actually, Milltail Swamp is fed by the Great Swamp to the south of this. So it's quite an extensive connected waterway. The other one I'm going to be showing you photos of is also up at Clay Head. Just to get your bearings, up here is where the pond went over the edge. And then you come, here's a pond called Stump Pond, fairly small. But again, it follows a drainage area, comes down to another little pond, which is near the road that goes into Lapham's house. That flows under the road into another little pond, which is now mostly swamp, but still very present. And that flows down the hill. The path that goes on the Clayhead path, the main Clayhead path goes this way. The pond, this river, this water flows underneath a boardwalk there, and then into the back of Clayhead Swamp, and then out to the ocean. Again, a huge, well, by Black Island standards, a very big connected waterway. So here we are at Milltail Swamp Pond in the wintertime. And full disclosure, this is my pond. This is my view right now, except the ice is not quite so hard. It's not so late. And this is where on occasion, not this year so far, well, one day this year, but now not so much this year, ice skating. And Black Island has a pretty long tradition on colder winters of using the ponds for fun, for ice skating and ice boating. Wish that it was a winter like that so I could augment this with some wonderful pictures. This is from this was actually from last year. And people of all ages skate, and all abilities. I love this photo because you have some of the young bucks working on their hockey and their maneuvers, and you have somebody learning. You can tell by the stance they're learning. You have people who aren't there to skate, they're just there to talk anyway. And it's a and this person, I think there's a person over here doesn't even have skates on. So fun time on ice when it's smooth and good for ice skating. So now we're moving on to the connecting pond, which is Mill Pond next to Town Hall. Now I am standing in the Town Hall parking lot on Old Town Road, looking across Mill Pond at residential houses on this side. Now, if I were to walk down the road a little bit, I would find myself looking this way, looking back. And so this house that I'm seeing here would be over here. Oops, well, that's okay. And then if I keep going around the corner, I would get to the lane that led to those houses, and I could look back to the southeast and see Town Hall and the road and how it travels along. You'll see over here, maybe you can just make out the culvert that drains this pond. And if you go back to the other side of this and look of the road of Old Town Road, and look back towards the culvert on the other side of the road, this is what you would see. So here's the road coming down from, say, the airport. It's going to go this way. And then there's this culvert, and the water behind it, Mill Pond, is draining out of this culvert 24/7. It was recently redone after over 100 years. And I'll show you in a second, and over 100 years, but it has this beautiful brick archway, which I don't know if anybody has the photo of that, but it was pretty much, it was faced with a brick archway so that it had a sense of the historic. So like any mill pond, a pond where they're using water to create energy, in this case to run an old mill wheel that was in the area back in the early 1800s. One side, it's smooth and quiet and still as a mill pond. On the other side, water is running, and in this case, here's the edge of the culvert, and it's running down this ditchway towards Ocean Avenue. And it was cold that day. We have icicles forming, and this is just a dead a tree limb, that branch that fell over, and it gathered grass, and then the icicles have been building up on it over the last last week when it was so cold. So back up to the other pond running to the ocean. This is Stump Pond up on the Clayhead Trail. You could take this trail, and the reason I took this photo like this is, so this is a big cedar tree. So if you find this cedar tree and it's right on the Clayhead Trail system, you'll know what pond I'm talking about. Of course, these don't have signs, nor do I think they should, but this is Stump Pond, a small, smooth pond, relatively small. And this is the one that's running. Here's a good view of it. And it's just running eventually out the back side of it, not the trail side, until it eventually reaches the Clayhead Swamp Pond. I asked Martha Ball, whose land this pond is on, even though the feature of the Littlefield farm is the neighbor to Martha Ball. The pond itself is on the Ball land. I asked her what the name of this was, and she said it doesn't have a name. I said, well, I thought it was called Clayhead Swamp. And she said, well, that's as good a name as any. So I'm not sure, but I've always known it as Clayhead Swamp. So we'll go from there. But a beautiful view. This is a view you cannot get unless you are invited to the second floor of the Lapham House. This is a pond that you cannot see very well from very many places unless you are on a piece of private property and taking a look. You can see the effects of it, and you can see little bits of it, but to see the entire pond is very difficult. So you might not know how big and how extensive this pond is. Now, if we drop down to the Clayhead Trail, where you go in by the parking lot at the end of the Clayhead Trail Road, and you take the trail, you'll go, of course, a boardwalk, which right now I don't recommend. If it's not icy, it's completely slick with mud. But here's the edge of the boardwalk. Water is running under this. Again, every day of the year, water is running under here. Sometimes it's more, it's a lot right now. It's a beautiful sound. So one of the few places on Black Island where I think you can stand and hear the babbling of water. It's really quite mesmerizing. And as you go along the trail, there's a little place where you can poke your head out and get actually, this is the view from the top of the hill before you start going down to the boardwalk. So you've got a little bit of height. And you can get a sense of a low area right here. That's about where the water is flowing, trickling onto the beach every day of the year. Once you get along a little bit farther down that pathway, the Clayhead Trail, before you get to the beach, not too far before, you can stick your head out and there's just a little tiny place to step out to the edge of the pond and see at pond level the view. And what you're looking at over here is Martha Ball's house. And if you're lucky, you get to visit Martha Ball's house once in a while. And this is the place from which you can see the pond the best. But even I didn't get a good picture from this side because I was enthralled with the fact that we had a small flock of snow geese on Black Island, and they were frequenting her yard and fields for about 3 weeks. And on Monday, I saw them flying over Corneck Road. So they're still around, about 30 snow geese enjoying Black Island's landscape. Okay, so that's your non-iced over pond intermission. And we'll go back to another pond that's flowing to the ocean. And you may be familiar with Kuna Pond or swamp. Again, it's called Kuna Swamp, but it has quite a bit of open water. And the road goes along, and you have one place where you can look out and see it fairly well. It's, again, a great place. This is a great place for winter birding because the water is flowing so much and it's so protected that there's often open water, even a little bit of it, where all the other ponds are frozen over. And when you have limited open water in a pond, then you get a concentration of winter ducks. But this one flows out sort of the backside and kind of makes its way and then comes out onto the beach here. And many of you maybe even have either heard of or have collected watercress in this area. I know in the 60s, many people took their jugs down there to catch water from here. There's a spring feeding this, and you just stick your water jug, which in those days were glass, and collect water for potable use. But that's not done anymore, nor is it recommended, nor would the property owner like it if you did that. But a pond that is going to the ocean. And I will point out this because you're going to see a picture of it. This is Warden's Pond. And to the best of my knowledge, I don't believe there's a connection between Warden's Pond and Kuna Swamp, although it seems unlikely. It seems likely that it would, but the landscape goes up quite a bit here. So I don't see a way that it can flow there unless it went down the road itself. But anyway, Warden's Pond is for a different slide. So here we are looking at Kuna Swamp from Kuna Road on the way to the beach. This is the great marshy area. This is where water is flowing. You can see a little bit better. There's a little bit of a plank board so you can get down to get some watercress. Again, this is private property. Please don't do that. And this is where in the open water you can often see great birds. And there's a great one right here, which turned out to be a northern pintail, which I've seen a couple of times this year on both this pond and the back of Seneca Swamp. So it's been nice. This is not a duck I get to see every year. So I love seeing it this year. All right, and now we're on to a different type of pond. So we started off with the meltwater channel ponds that were formed by the erosion of water melting off the glaciers. Kettle Hole ponds are relatively small, round, steep-sided ponds that were formed by a giant block of ice from the glaciers falling off and sitting there for a long time and more slowly melting while land sort of built up around them. And so they tend to be very, they tend to silt in on the bottom because the lighter materials stayed behind. So the clay, silty, thick area. So many of these ponds have clay bottom or very clay bottom, so they don't drain quickly. They stay mostly with water in them. Again, they're round, small, and steep-sided. So we're going to be looking at a couple of those. The first one is over here. This is Hull Pond. Now, this is where the road is different. This is the old Center Road. It would be crossing the airport runway now. The road changed and it goes this way. And it comes right by this pond that's known as Hull Pond. And this is the intersection up here is called Isaac's Corner. So about halfway between Isaac's Corner and the Nathan Mott Park is where you'll find Hull Pond right at the edge of the main road. If you go around the corner, you can go the road that's currently not in this photo and not in this map, but since then, Old Mill Road, where you can continue on to Kuna Road. And this is called Horse Pond. And then down here we have Rodman's Pond, which I'll be talking about. This is off of the road, Champlain Road. It goes off almost right away as you go down Champlain Road. There's a road called Rodman Road, and it goes right by Rodman Pond. This is largely owned by the Nature Conservancy now. And another in the area, the A&A Tea Room Pond, which again, West Side Road goes around the corner here. And we'll be seeing those. So this is a Hull Pond. I'm standing on the driveway that goes in here. This is not the public access way. The public access way is actually on the other side of the pond across from Smiling Through. That's another story. But this wonderful pond is used in my life for skating. It's because it's relatively small and protected on most sides. It's often the pond that will freeze the smoothest. And it's big enough to have hockey at one end and little kids learning at the other, and in between kids just having fun. Not this winter, but many. Wonderful vegetation around the edge of this. But I love the patterns of the snow and the ice on this particular day. And this, like Brider's Pond, will overflow and just flow out of the edge of the pond, out onto the road and run down Center Road towards the end of the airport runway. So again, water is always running on Block Island. That's Hull Pond. Sometimes people call it Sunny Pond. There are many names for this, but I grew up learning it as Hull Pond. So you go down the road from Hull Pond, take the corner towards Rodman's Hollow. Right away, you'll come to Old Mill Road right here. And in the corner is this little small Kettle Hole Pond called Horse Pond. So this is the road that goes on to Rodman's Hollow. And this is the road that goes through Old Mill Road. And you get a view of it again. Here's Old Mill Road. This is the main road towards and looking over this relatively small little pond called Horse Pond. And I was told years ago by Captain Lewis, Rob Lewis, that the reason it's called Horse Pond is because, of course, in the days when you were getting to town, which was down by the Old Town Inn, by horse carriage, you would, in cart and horses, you would have to come up Center Road, what some people call Airport Hill, but which is really called Strip Gut. And you would come up that pond, that road, and your horse would need a drink. So the first pond you could come to that had a place for the horse to take a drink was at Horse Pond, so-called. I'm just taking a little break because my battery is about to give out, and I'm plugging it in, and I'll be right back with you. There we go. So that's Horse Pond. It used to have a huge willow tree right in the corner that would be the first thing that would you'd start seeing it yellow up. And I would look longingly at the pussy willows on that tree with no way of getting to it. But that tree has fallen in, unfortunately. Things go on. All right, the other Kettle Hole pond that you're probably all familiar with is this pond on the corner of West Side Road, the big corner right here. If you go off to the to the left of the screen, it would go to Sprague Farm. This is called the A&A Tea Room Pond. It's named after the little building across the street, which is not in any of my views, I don't think. Oh wait, maybe it's in, no, it's not in that view. It's right over here, right off screen. I should have included it. It's an old house. It used to be a tea room, a place where you would go for your afternoon tea, owned by the Allen sisters. And thus it was the A&A Tea Room Pond, the pond near the A&A Tea Room. So this is Rodman Pond, the one I spoke of that is just off of Champlain Road. This is looking from a piece of private property. Do not go here. This is the eastern edge of the pond, looking back towards this edge, which is where you can get access at the western edge. And I love this because it's got I talked about trees falling in. Here it is, evergreen has fallen in and will be decaying there for a number of years. Here we are at the other end looking back. This might be my new favorite pond, or the pond of the year to explore. I love this pond. It's beautiful. It's got amazing vegetation around the edge. Native rushes and grasses and sphagnum moss and wonderful high bush blueberries. So a really, really beautiful area, very peaceful. A little still pond perched right in the landscape, hardly noticed by anyone. Then here we are at the western end of Rodman Pond looking back. So the part you don't go is over here, somebody's yard, but you can come down Rodman Road and walk in and get along the edge here and explore the vegetation and the birds. And in case anybody doesn't recognize that shadow, that's me in my pointy hat. All right, moving on to the West Beach ponds. Probably you're familiar with these three ponds. I think these are fascinating ponds for the future. As sea level rise comes, we are in the process of sea level rise and extreme storms, these ponds all are in danger of being breached, not only on a temporary basis, but possibly on a permanent basis. As we talk about, this is over here. So this is, just get your bearings. This is West Beach. This goes out to Bean Point. This inside of the Great Salt Pond is Andy's Way area. This would be Skipper's Island. So as sea level rise comes, it's going to flood the salt marsh of Andy's Way. And there's the land goes up, so there's nothing to allow the migration of the marsh inland. But here along this edge, I predict that these will become the next saltwater wetlands and marshes in the future, because they're all very vulnerable to inundation by the tide. So this is Wash Pond. If you don't know where it is, you're going to know soon. This is Middle Pond, probably my favorite pond in the whole island, and then Socken Pond, known to many. This is Wash Pond. Now, this is hard to take in the whole breadth of how big this marshy area is. There's a little water here, there's water here, there's standing water all throughout, there's a little sort of island of vegetation, but mostly it's Phragmites now. And if you want to know where I stood to take this picture and get this view, all you have to do is recognize where those are. Those are the beautiful sculptures at the at the transfer station. So Wash Pond is right on the other side of this crest. You go down, and here you can see a bit of it back there. So that's Wash Pond, probably the first that will become a saltwater marsh. Here it is a little bit closer. This is the eastern edge. This breaches in a big storm. Sorry, I said western edge. This is the eastern edge, which has water flowing into it from above. These are the fields up towards the Roan and Hodge. So it's a very interesting area that will become, I probably won't live to see it, but I believe this will be a salt marsh one day. Now, my favorite pond, this you cannot see unless you're invited to this spot. This is private property, at least from this side. This is Middle Pond. It's right up against the dune. So if you're walking the beach and you took a peek over the dune, you would look into this pond. The rolling landscape leading to this pond with the textures of land and shrub and pond and dune and ocean. To me, it's just stunning colors, but it's a very hard place to get a good picture of the pond. You sort of get the hint of the pond, and maybe that's part of the mystery and the magic of it, that it's a little bit left to the imagination. So this is Socken Pond from the road, the first turnout looking west. There's the North Light out there. Again, a very large pond. Again, hard to get high enough to get a good view of the shape unless you go up to the town right of way that is known as the Breed Land. And once you get up here, you can look down and see the pond from a different point of view. So that first picture was taken from over here on the northeast, looking to the southwest. This one is from the south looking north, and there, of course, is the North Light. And there, of course, is a view that, it's iconic. And again, nothing says Block Island more than fields, stone walls, shrubs, ponds, lighthouse, ocean. So there are two well-known ponds on Block Island, which are not ponds. These are saltwater inlets, Trims Pond and Harbor Pond. And here they are again, ice flowing out of them this winter on a couple of days, looking back into the back reaches of Trims Pond. And here Harbor Pond standing at Dunn's Bridge, looking back into the reaches of Harbor Pond. Harbor Pond makes it almost all the way to the Block Island Grocery, and Trims Pond goes all the way up to about the middle of the upper part of Beach Avenue. So interesting little interlets, but not really ponds. And of course, Block Island has duck ponds. I've already mentioned Breidert's Pond, which is the one I will probably always think of first when somebody says a duck pond. But more modern days, we have this little tiny pond down here on Corn Road at the bottom, about halfway down Bushlot Hill. This is on the property of the Harts, Debbie Hart, and a little tiny duck pond. And probably the best known by most people is this little pond halfway between Old Town Road. This is the intersection at the Old Town Inn going up to the airport. And then here we have Cheryl Blaine's duck pond. This is the one on Corn Neck Road. Beautiful views just walking along Corn Neck Road. If you pay attention and look off to the east, once you get to the spot, you see this little tiny muddy little pond, always open, always with a couple of ducks in it, domestic ducks, I should say. I'm talking about domestic ducks now. And here's one view of it that's just stunning. I'm standing on Corn Neck Road, looking over a stone wall. Oh, there you can see me taking the picture, looking at this little pond, this wonderful old tree, and there are in fact ducks in there, personal friends of the Hart family. And then this is the duck pond on Old Town Road, up at, here's Cheryl Blaine's house up in the back. And here's a better view of it. looking straight on. You don't have to go, you just stay on the road and you can see you can see domestic ducks and wild ducks in this pond. And here's looking across from somebody's driveway. You can just walk up the driveway and look at a slightly different way. And back in there, I'm sure you can see them. Those are the ducks. This is a wonderful combination of domestic and mallard hybrid ducks, and they're really quite beautiful. And I happened to be there one day when Cheryl came home at the end of the day. They know her truck. She turned in the driveway and they started quacking up a storm and waddling and swimming over to where they were going to get a little grain. And finally, some useful ponds, large useful ponds, Continental Pond, which is on High Street, and a pond I don't really know the name of, but it's at the end of Gracie's Cove Road. Here's the Continental Pond on High Street. I am taking this picture from private property. This is, again, because of the vegetation around the pond, a pond that's hard to see these days. I grew up on High Street, so I still see it completely open in my mind, but of course it's not. Here's a better view of it from the back of somebody's house, right at the edge of the pond, looking at this iconic hill house on the hill, and a beautiful pond, great place for birds. The only part of Continental Pond that you can see while on public property is when you're going along the southern edge. There's a sidewalk there, but that edge is very vegetated, lots of old trees and stumps and things like that. But every once in a while you see a great blue heron there. And I've been also, in the last few years, I'm anxious to see about this year, I've seen wood duck in this area. I hope someday to get a wood duck actually nest there, but it hasn't happened yet that I know of. And then this is the pond at the end of Gracie's Cove Road. I'm not sure what it's called. I have asked people. Nobody seems to have a real name for it. Beautiful. Of course, out here, ducks, good place for ducks. This is right from Gracie's Cove Road, standing right on the edge of the pond. So again, you can see this view on a public road, looking across at a Block Island landscape that is just, again, iconic. But if you look out there and you're looking for ducks, you might see these guys. This is an American black duck that were in the water back here, and then they got up on the ice and went waddling away before I could get a halfway decent photo, but there they are. And this is that view. What you're looking at is Sprague Farm, the back of Sprague Farm, again with the barn in the spring. I always look to see if there's any new foals. One of the few working farms such as this left on the island. So some people may call this Sprague's Farm. I believe it is possibly on their land. It definitely abuts their land. And with that, I thank you for your attention. I know that might have been a little bit longer than I was thinking it should be, and I'm happy to take questions. And see if anybody, let's just see, anybody know which of the ponds I've just spoken of this is? Take a good look. I'm about to unshare. There we go. Oh, not too bad.
Thanks, Kim. That was awesome.
It was a little bit of a whirlwind.
So many ponds. We got 365, so you had to narrow it down. I know.
I know. Well, once I got working on the presentation, I became completely enthralled with the types of ponds and where they are and all the things about ponds that you might not know about on Block Island. It's not just 360 ponds.
Great. So I'm hearing a little feedback. I'm not sure where I'm getting it from, but Nancy, I see you have your hand raised. Do you have a question?
I just had a kind of a comment and a question, Kim. That was really lovely, beautiful. I live on Elijah's Tug Haul, and my understanding was that many of these ponds were used for peat, and that there's a little island in the middle of the Elijah's Tug Hole. And my understanding was that they would pull the peat out, they would tug it out and put it on this little island, and then they had a little house where they would put the tug and dry it out to use for fuel.
Yeah. Yeah. I didn't spend too much time on that, but many of these ponds, as that was used for peat or tug, for tugging it out. The pond that's gone over at Clayhead, they believe was used, the back part of that pond was used for peat, for tugging, and that you could drain it out into the little pond, and then the back pond would dry up enough to pull out the peat.
Right.
Same thing with John E.'s Tug Hole on Pilot Hill, many of them. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that Elijah's Tug Hole actually, and I know it can drain to Kunimus.
Yeah.
And there's a little dam that they would open up so they could drain it. And right now the dam is overflowing and it is draining.
Yeah. On the map that I had Kunimus and Warden's, I think I narrowed it down so it did not see Elijah's Tug Hole, but it is on that map, and it does show that swampy, marshy area flows to Kunimus Swamp. So you're on the land there, so you know more about it than I do. Everything you say is as I understand it to be.
It's also a great skating pond.
Yeah, if only we had some good ice.
If only we had some ice, right?
Yeah. Well, there's a bunch of comments and questions in the chat. I can go through that, and if anyone has any questions to raise. So John was saying that that the town was looking at ways to mitigate the erosion at the Springhouse Pond, but I have not heard anything recently. Any town efforts to save it?
My understanding there is both the town and the land trust, which is mostly the land trust owns that property and the town has easements over it, have looked at it and expended some resources to sort of assess it. And it's my understanding that it's a fool's errand. We're just trying to protect people from not getting hurt by encouraging people not to walk below there.
Yeah.
But I don't believe there are no plans that I know of to try to restrain it, and I don't. Yeah. I think that the conclusion was it's not really possible.
Yeah, I think I remember something similar to that, Kim. Also, Anna was running the. I remember this as well. The Black Island Times showed photos of the interior of the culvert being repaired, so that might be a source to finding it. And Judith says,
those were pictures that I think John Willis took. I have seen in my life a great picture of inside of that were even better than those, but it was people were looking for that and cannot find it. So it was at Town Hall in the town council desk for years, but somewhere at time around probably the 90s, it probably got misplaced and it's probably in Town Hall somewhere.
Yeah. And one question about from John, are the ponds public or private, or depends on circumstances? That is public access to all ponds.
It depends on the circumstances. Yeah. So almost all the ponds are on private land. Now, in some cases, the private land owner has either deeded the land over to a conservation organization, in which case they're more public, or there are easements. So for instance, the ones at Clay Head, they're on private land owned by the Laphams, but the Nature Conservancy and or the state have easements, so you can gain access to them. But most of the interior ponds, you should really be finding the owner and asking before you go swimming, sailing, kayaking, fishing, etc.
Yeah, and Judith was saying that they always called the tea room Aunt Inez's tea room. I wonder if that's where that came from. I thought it was Linda Tripler's Aunt Inez. Does that sound?
Well, yeah, the Allen sisters were in Linda Tripler's family. I don't know about Inez. I always heard them as the Allen sisters.
The Allen sisters, yeah.
Which makes sense because it's A&A tea room. I don't know about Inez, but now there's a question for Diane Tripler.
Okay. And oh, on the Grace's Cove Pond, Judith says on the map app that it's marked as Sia's Swamp.
Ah,
SIAH apostrophe swamp. So
Sia's Swamp. All right. Well, I will. I have heard that. I'm not sure if it's that one, but that's good. I'm glad to hear that. That's a good point. I'm gonna double check that with Joe Sprague. I wouldn't dare call it anything until I got the okay from him.
yeah. And the ponds on the Coast Guard Road that are on the right when you're heading in, those are the iconic ones. It was Champlain Farm, you know, the
Oh yeah, the one I didn't show.
yeah. Yeah, Kim. I always refer to them as the Champlain Farm ponds. If there was another name for them, Kim, or
that's what I call it. That's what I think everybody I know calls it. And I, 365 ponds, you couldn't get them all. That is iconic pond. And that pond, also I touch on that in the presentation about the Cormorant Point Swamp, because that pond drains out towards the Cormorant Cove Swamp. I think they call it Cormorant Point Swamp. And that drains down to that, and then that goes out through a culvert into the Cormorant Cove.
Yeah.
So another pond inland that drains through a system to the ocean. There's many of those, many more than we know.
You can't do them all, Kim.
No.
And Anna, thanks again for riveting and really amazing presentation. And Faye also says fascinating. Thank you for sharing all your knowledge, Kim. I am wondering how you define a pond.
I defined a pond as being a water body that isn't connected other than drainage to another water body. So it's interesting. I had troubles with that on both Kuna Swamp. I've always known as Kuna Swamp, even though it's also got open water and therefore a pond. Same with Clayhead Swamp. Same with Milltail Swamp Pond is a little different because it was actively dammed up to create a pond. I think it's a little gray area about whether or not you call it a pond or you could call it a wetland, a multi-type wetland, because most of them have swamps and marshland and bogs and fens or open water, or wetlands have a long sort of list of different ways of describing them, all based on vegetation. So open water is, I guess I would call a pond. As far as I'm concerned, we don't have any lakes on Block Island, although sometimes I will hear people refer to Sockham Pond as a lake, or Fresh Pond as a lake. But to me, a lake is much bigger.
And Jules is asking if there's any monitoring of any of the ponds for blue-green algae that he has seen dogs at the vet clinic with associated infections from swimming.
I don't really know about that. I know that the water company monitors to a certain extent Sands Pond and Fresh Pond. And you can actually at different times of the year and in its histories, if you were flying over Block Island, you could see a difference in color of those ponds based on how much algae was in them, blue-green algae or algae. Stump Pond is periodically tested, but I don't know of anybody who's doing that on a regular monitoring basis. Other than that, I think the private homeowner at one point at Kuna Swamp Pond used to test for that as a way of deterring people from accessing it, but I don't believe that's continued either. So that's a good study there, Jules. Get a little extra time in your day.
I sense a volunteer project.
Yeah.
Great. Well, I think that's what I got from the chat. If anyone else had any comments or questions, feel free to speak up.
So great to see so many of you. Looking forward to the weather warming and getting back out in the field. But for now, this is pretty nice.
Yeah, not bad. Great. Well, thanks everyone. And unless anyone had anything else, we'll see you next time.
Okay.
Thanks. Great to see
Thank
you all.
you.
Thank
Bye
you. It was
everyone. Thank you.
wonderful.
Good. All right.